we've been very upfront at the very beginning of all of this, so, and I think it's becoming public knowledge of what the two are, so people know what they're giving to.
And that's the key point, because I think what you're getting at is the donor's intent is paramount.
Right.
And if your donor is under some sort of misperception, I mean, that's really on you to make sure there isn't a misperception about how their gifts can be spent. I'm getting like lots of waves and nods
No, you have
from the back
15 minutes,
row,
you're fine.
and I do want to cover a couple of other things. So another thing, we seem to be getting so many inquiries about, and this is just a really fun topic here, is churches who say, we have a trust, or there is a trust that exists for the benefit of our church, and we want to understand it better. Either it's, we want to understand it better and can we control it ourselves, or it's, oh, we're going to work with you and set up our policies, and we have nothing, and we want a brand new, pick your word, true and non-permanent, whatever, endowment fund. And oh, by the way, there's also this trust. And we say, well, why don't you send us the trust documents? We'd like to learn more. I know I'm a little bit mindful of the time, but I have their trust into endowment funds with quotations very intentionally, because by and large, you're not going to be able to turn a trust into an endowment fund, but you can turn it into, potentially, it's worth exploring whether you can turn it into something that looks, feels, acts a little bit more like an endowment fund than it did as a trust. If you as a vestry can control the investment, if you as the vestry really can understand how it's spent and it's to your benefit, then it's starting to function more like your long-term permanent funds. Obviously, if you can convert a trust in some way into something that looks a little bit more like an endowment, it gives you the chance to simplify your management and manage those trust funds more directly. Modernize protection of long-term funds. I mean, a lot of these trusts were set up for the benefit of churches long ago, when it was the trust instrument itself that gave the protection for the funds. Now there's so much state law of IFA around protecting funds that a donor sets aside in perpetuity. You don't really need to have, these are some gross generalizations, but just for the point of discussion, you don't really need to have the trust existing. It's an added layer of complexity. If you have a little bit more control as a church, as a vestry, you can then oversee these funds that are in trust, were in trust, along with any other long-term funds that you have. So you really then are doing your planning, your strategic planning, your budgeting with good insight into all of your long-term funds, whether they remain in a trust structure under your control or not. Invest them together. I mean, that certainly can simplify your investment strategy. You're not investing in two places. Invest together, track and spend separately. And then, of course, going back to what we talked about endowment structure, you may be able to state a little bit more clearly what your overall endowment structure is at your church, so that potential donors really understand, and there's not this myth out there, well, they don't need my funds, there's some trust that sort of benefits, and see, I see it in the financial report, the annual report. It just makes it all a little bit more clear and transparent. We talk a lot with churches about these trusts, and often what we're doing is, at the outset, we're just helping members of an investment committee understand what's there and what might be possible. We do not in any way act as lawyers for our churches, but we can really help them spot the issues. And I'm going to run through a couple of examples very quickly, just to sort of see how, in these different cases, the churches began to tackle this idea that there's a trust for their benefit. So in the first case, there's old trusts established in the 1930s. The church was very frustrated with the bank trustee. Originally it was a local bank, now a large national bank. They've sort of been shunted off to somebody who doesn't know them. It's that same sort of, you got to know me feeling that the investment committee brought to us, and they said, we want to better understand. Can you help us look? We said, absolutely. Well, baked right in there into those 1930s trust documents were some provisions around appointing a successor trustee. In this case, it was really a very simple approach for the church to use the successor trustee provisions to get rid of the bank in each case, there's trust 1, trust 2, handled a little bit differently. But then the end result, and in fact, what's also interesting is they were, under the provisions of the trust, they were going to be able to remove the bank trustee, but they didn't obviously even have to go through that process. All they did was talk with us, get some issues, find a local lawyer, got a little bit armed, and then went to the bank and said, we would like to talk about this, and the bank immediately said, fine, we'll just resign. They then appointed, in one case, the vestry members, so that the first trust has 5 members of the church as the trustees, and in the second case, the second trust has the vestry as an entity as the trustee. These trusts remain in place. The trusts are not gone, but now the church, as both trustee and beneficiary, is really in charge of the management of those funds and has a better sense of how to invest them and how to spend them. And so that was really a success story and in our work with that church. And now, of course, they don't have other endowment funds. This is it. Now they're sort of going through the whole process of learning what it means to be an investment committee with these responsibilities. The next one is a trust that was created very recently, actually, when the donor died. This donor had lots of assets invested with an investment manager at his death, and that investment manager, again, is this local national story. Originally, the investment manager was local. By the time this man died, that had been swallowed up by a large national financial institution located elsewhere. Most of the assets were dispersed at death, but, and I'll use my air quotes here, a small portion of those assets were to remain at this investment manager and were to be placed in a trust created at death for the benefit of this church. So this is where this bank turned around and said, this is way too small for us. We're not interested in managing that. And through the church, they connected with ECF, and we went through a process with them to terminate that trust and established a fund managed by ECF. So there's a case where this church was going to be the beneficiary of something that was sort of outside their control, outside their knowledge. You know, what trustees have to disclose is not a lot. And now they've got something that's more part of their financial management. Here's another one very quickly. In this case, in the 1940s, the vestry itself created a trust, which surprised me until you realize that, of course, in the 1940s, it was that trust structure that provided the protection. But what's here, and again, the operative provision is in brown, because the vestry created it and the church is the beneficiary, the vestry could undo it, if you will, acting as both donor and on behalf of the beneficiary. So this is a church that came to us to set up new policies. They were doing a capital campaign. Part of that was going to be for endowment gifts. They wanted a new fund for endowment gifts. Oh, by the way, we have this trust. So we worked with them to propose this kind of structure where they would revoke the trust and create a true endowment with those old gifts, and then set up a new, quasi-endowment, non-permanent endowment for their new gifts, and that would be the policies, the way they work together. And then the last example is here. This is a trust in the 1930s. Absolutely bare bones language. I mean, if there were 50 words in the trust document, I would be shocked. So there, when it's silent, you look to state law. State law has some no-fault removal provisions. I'm not sure how this has worked out. We've lost touch with them in the short term, but the idea there would be just using that process to try and, again, keep the trust in place, but have the vestry as the successor trustee. So these are just efforts that sort of come to us as we have these wonderful conversations with churches who get our sample policies and call us back up and say, please help us think through what our structure could look like, and by the way, here are some facts that you should know. I don't know if any of you have trusts for the benefit of your church, know about them, or if you ever did. The one thing I want to flag, yes?
My old church, we did have one, and it was being managed by a national firm, same scenario, started off as local.
Yeah.
That bank did not resign.
Yeah.
And it took the 2008 financial crisis for them to lose a bunch of our money, and then we threatened to either sue or let us go.
Yeah.
But, you know,
It's
I mean,
a tough guy a little bit.
Well, yeah, it wasn't me, I wasn't involved, but yes, we had to be tough. But it took, a multi-million-dollar loss.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, we lost close to $4 million.
That's why they kept it.
Yeah.
That's why they fought, but bank trust companies are notoriously awful.
I'm getting the wave. I just wanted to mention one thing though. Here was this example of a trust created very recently when the donor died. The donor had been a long time donor to the church. Should you, as you're talking amongst your congregation today and talking with potential donors, hear of anyone who might say something like, oh yes, I have made a provision for St. Anne's. In my will, I'm going to create a trust when I die. It's going to be for you. That is a great opportunity to take that guy out to lunch and have a longer conversation about why that trust isn't really necessary. And you'll have wonderful sample policies in place. I just wanted to flag that because it's really not ideal. I want to just talk quickly about this idea of endowment giving. Here are some other things that we are hearing a lot of from our own churches and seeing in place, but also certainly hearing from other experts and trying to bring back to our churches. Donors have lots of pots of assets today. When you go back 50 years and people had, a bank account, an investment account, and a house, and to grossly oversimplify. Today donors have so many different pots of assets. Each of those pots of assets really is a good source of potential gifts to a church. And it's conversations in churches about giving are it's very different than in the context of a big university or a college. So how you learn what donors have and how you learn what they might want to accomplish through one donation or a series of donations, that's a little bit that's very subtle for sure. But I just wanted to flag two things. Obviously, many clients, many donors have retirement accounts. And those, I just want to emphasize again, those really can be used for both current giving and ultimate giving. And we used to think that current gifts, annual gifts, are made out of your earned income for the year, and then estate gifts are really what's left over at the end of your life, a totally different pot. An IRA can be used for annual giving through using a qualified charitable distribution. I hope many of you have language about that, perhaps on your pledge cards. That would be an annual gift that comes out of an IRA. I mean, it could go anywhere, but it's nifty for annual gifts. It comes out of your IRA once you're 70 and a half. It's tax favored. It's a neat way to make annual gifts. But also that IRA could be, you have to make a beneficiary designation. Where does my IRA go at my death? It passes outside my will, according to the terms of the document itself. And you have the chance there to name a church as a beneficiary or a contingent beneficiary. And I'm going to come back to that down here in a second. Another, donor-advised funds. So certainly, I hope you all are talking about the donor-advised funds as being a way to make charitable gifts. A donor puts a chunk of money in a donor-advised fund today and gets the charitable contribution today, and then over time can gradually recommend charitable gifts from that over the years to come. So that annual gift out of a DAF is a great way for a church to get an annual gift in a way that's, has tax advantages to the donor. But a DAF also could potentially go somewhere at death. And what I wanted to, and it might be managed by a successor advisor. I could set up a DAF, I advise on the grants, and then after I die, my daughter will take over and be the successor advisor, and that's very wonderful. But if you don't have that in place, the DAF has to go somewhere. What I wanted to flag is that there's so many different institutions offer DAFs now. Some charities do, nonprofits. Episcopal Church Foundation has a DAF, but also a lot of financial advisors have DAFs, and they may very well not tell you that if you do not nominate a successor advisor, name a successor advisor, and do not otherwise specify, that DAF at your death will go into Fidelity Charitable, and they'll use it in their own way. And so if you have a DAF, I don't know if any of you here have set up a DAF or if you work with clients, make sure that that's on your mind. And then the last thing I wanted to flag very quickly is if you are getting annual gifts from a QCD or a DAF, QCD out of an IRA, it's a lot of alphabet soup. You'll probably have some sort of indication when that gift's come to you that it has come that way. I really encourage you to keep good records about the donors who are making gifts to you in that way, because in the right time and place, that's a real opportunity to circle back to them and say, oh, I understand you have an IRA. If they're making QCD from it, they're obviously not needing it themselves. It's an opportunity at the right time and in your own way to ask, would you consider naming the church as a beneficiary of that IRA? Or do you know that you could name the church as the recipient of your death upon your death? So again, record keeping, very good there. I'm really moving along quickly because it's almost time, but please, yes.
On the QCDs, and you have IRA, is that also true for 401k?
No, it has to be,
Has to go through an IRA?
Right.
Traditional IRA.
right,
A traditional IRA?
right,
But you can move
yes.
from a 401k to a traditional IRA.
When you
To make it,
retire
yeah.
or leave employment and switch to another employer, you have the opportunity to take your retirement assets out of the 401k and put it in an IRA.
Question, you made the question of a traditional IRA, so an inherited IRA, you couldn't do that?
Nope.
You inherit, depending on your age, no, yeah, so.
Well, you can only make a QCD if you're 70 and
70
a
and a
half, and
half.
I think you could do it out of an inherited IRA if you're
If
70
you're
and a half.
If you're
But
70 and a half.
that gets very complicated with some
Yeah.
new legislation. The Secure Act just passed in December.
Right, because
I'm not
well, that's
gonna-
why I'm thinking, because that's a 10-year thing, but you do have to be 70 and a half, I know that.
That
Yeah.
has not changed,
Yeah.
that's the
I mean,
same.
an inherited IRA is a traditional IRA. The difference is with a Roth IRA, which has been
Correct, right.
taxed differently at the outset.
Right.
So you don't get this little
I
special.
understand.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we're getting the
Yep.
hook.
Yeah.
But if you, I don't have my clicker, so if you can just click through the next, these slides will be given to you, just these are things we're seeing right away. This is an ongoing trend. More and more investment committees are not just doing their own management, they're looking for outside advisors. I hope everyone in this room has made that good choice and chosen to work with someone like the Church Investment Group or the Episcopal Church Foundation or 1919 whomever to do this sort of stuff. We've already talked about expanding on accepting different types of gifts. This helps people know they can go beyond cash. And with other changes you can hear about on Friday, that's a new opportunity. Also, income streams. This is something I think next year I'm going to try and figure out a way to do this in a workshop. We're seeing more and more parishes in different places of the country focus on having the three legs: endowment income, ongoing donations, as well as other income. Like in the Northeast, a lot of parishes in Newark are working on cell phone towers and getting income from that. A lot of parishes in Hawaii and other places in the Pacific Northwest focus on income from weddings. So new opportunities. Obviously, you have to double check on the unrelated business income issues of that, but it's a new opportunity. And so, as we mentioned before, there are more larger gifts coming in with the change in the tax law. One quick thing I just want to highlight with donor advised funds. This is a shift from the National Philanthropic Trust. You can look this up online, happy to share. We are seeing, everyone's seeing this huge increase, right, in the amount of money going into that. So what's also happening is the number of accounts. And what that is indicating by this surge in the number, if you go to the next slide, is that the amount in each staff is going lower. So more and more regular people are going to start using donor advised funds because of the changes in the tax law. And it started to happen right when you would think, back at the end of 2017, and then it's accelerating from that time. The next and last slide is just, stay tuned. I'm going to figure out a way to do this next year. There is some exciting things happening with all of these wonderful baby boomers retiring, because there are tremendous assets being held in illiquid form.
I'm gonna give you some time with Ernie tomorrow to talk about this, so save that,
Sure,
okay?
I can share, I'll
Because
say
that's-
more about that. This is a new opportunity. What it translates for you guys, that DAFs, donor advised funds, can be used as a tool to enable that giving when people are retiring of those illiquid assets.
Okay, thank you. 15-minute